The loud, self-assured, and unabashedly brash woman who became a household figure thanks to reality television was Angela Deem. Millions of people knew her face, her laugh was indelible, and her anger was legendary. However, behind the cameras, behind the fiery energy and the forced smiles, Angela had been secretly immersing herself in a world that few people were aware of. Slowly, the once exciting renown started to smother her. She was unable to manage how the long filming hours, the ongoing criticism from the public, and the need to maintain an image began to break her down. Innocently, it began with a few prescription medications following surgeries, something to reduce tension and numb the anxieties that fame had bestowed upon her. However, the tiny doses eventually lost their effectiveness. Her dependence increased along with the emotional suffering. What she initially believed to be a brief diversion turned into a covert addiction that dominated her thoughts and characterized her evenings. Being by herself in her house, away from the interviews and TV lights, made her feel alienated. Her surroundings were aware of the shift, but nobody dared to say anything. On television, Angela's energy grew erratic. On certain days, she was practically frantic, too high and too eager. On other days, she appeared worn out, aloof, and emotionally devoid. It was perceived by her close pals as stress. Some said it resulted from her relationships and public scandals. The fiery lady who had defied everyone, Angela Deem, had become addicted, but no one could fathom why. Slowly, her connection with her family started to deteriorate. Arguments became commonplace, calls went ignored, and her emotional detachment increased. She began to shy away from interviews, social events, and things that used to make her happy. She wished to hide the extent of her decline from others. Her sole solace came in the evenings when she didn't have to be tough. There were nights when she could lose herself in her own thoughts because the world was silent enough. It was too late by the time her closest friends and family realized she was addicted. Angela's reputation was starting to fall apart. Her health was getting worse, and her finances were struggling. The production team began to hear rumors that something was amiss. She consistently claimed to be fine while denying everything and hiding behind her fiery nature. However, Angela knew in her heart that she wasn't okay. It had been a while since she had been okay, and the truth she had been keeping for years will soon be revealed to the world. Angela Deem had run out of time. What had begun as a private struggle had now started to leave permanent impacts on her life. Her previously assured voice faltered during interviews. Her eyes betrayed a fatigue that even makeup couldn't cover, and her fury, which had once been her television signature, became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. Her health was clearly deteriorating. Colleagues and friends began to avoid her, muttering to one another about how different she had changed. Angela was able to ignore the mounting worry for months. She assured herself that she was in charge. She believed she could give up at any time. Addiction, however, doesn't play fair. It waits, develops, and then devours everything. She started avoiding cameras, canceling engagements, and missing public events. Networks and producers contacted Angela, but she was unable to provide any concrete responses. The world that once loved her started to slowly fade away as the loneliness intensified. Around this time, her neighbors started to notice odd things: late-night guests, unpredictable noises, disputes that reverberated through the walls, and a once vibrant woman who suddenly seemed scared and lost. Once a source of fun, her home became a silent, dark haven for her suffering. She also became less active on social media. After she stopped posting daily updates, fans began to worry where she had disappeared to. Some thought she was on a vacation, while others were afraid of something much more serious. Then everything changed one night. After a furious argument with someone who had been giving her illegal narcotics, Angela was discovered slumped outside her house. Local officials took notice of the scene, and police started looking into it within a few hours. What they found was devastating. Indications of significant emotional anguish, misuse of prescription medications, and evidence of long-term substance usage. For the first time, Angela's television character was not the center of attention. Rather, it was the shattered, fragile woman who created it. News quickly spread. Almost immediately, the story was taken up by media outlets. who then twisted it into dramatic headlines. Desperate to catch a sight of the fallen star, paparazzi gathered outside her residence. The fact that the world was suddenly amused by the secret suffering that Angela had concealed for years made it feel like her greatest nightmare. Angela lost it all when the cops interrogated her. It was more than just the drugs. It was the loneliness of losing people she trusted, the pressure of being famous, and the emotional burden of years of feigning strength. Somewhere along the way, she had lost herself, and now she had nowhere to hide. Quietly, almost gently, she was arrested. The officers saw a shattered woman in need of assistance, not a criminal. Angela didn't fight back. She felt almost relieved that someone had finally discovered the truth for the first time in years. She had lost the mask she had worn for so long. Pretending and denial were no longer an option. The internet went crazy when word leaked out about her arrest. Fans expressed disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. Many were shocked to learn that the woman who used to dominate every scene on 90 Day Fiancé had descended into such a sinister realm. Behind the public outcry, however, was a more subdued reality. Angela was at last in a position where she could be saved, but only through suffering. Shortly after her arrest, she was moved to a rehabilitation facility. She stepped into a place where healing was gradual, unfiltered, and agonizingly real, away from the cameras and the commotion. It would be a long and difficult path ahead, but for Angela, it might have been the first step to confronting who she had become and possibly finding the strength to be someone else. Angela found the first few days in the rehabilitation facility intolerable. Compared to the chaos she had left behind, the calm seemed louder. She had spent years surrounded by noise, cameras, and unceasing attention. Suddenly, she was compelled to sit and think alone. She had no makeup artists, no producers, and no scripts to hide her facial fatigue. Every mirror served as a reminder of her new identity, a frail person who had lost control of her life, rather than the fiery lady whom millions had seen on television. The withdrawal symptoms were severe in the beginning. Every hour felt like a fight she couldn't win, her thoughts screaming, her body trembling. Angela was not accustomed to being vulnerable, despite the nurses' and counselors' attempts to console her. One traumatic memory at a time, the barriers she had erected for years to shield herself from criticism were suddenly being ripped down. Every day seemed to go on forever. Sleep came infrequently, and when it did, it brought regretful nightmares, flashes of her former self, of the people she had harmed, of the woman she had been. Gradually, as the days stretched into weeks, Angela started to notice pieces of herself coming back. During group therapy sessions, she began to speak, initially reluctantly and later more freely. People who had fallen exactly like her, who had lost everything to addiction but were still working on their recovery, told her experiences. She didn't feel like a failure or a celebrity for the first time. She had a human feeling. Everybody in that room was fighting a different version of the same conflict, she realized. She was advised by the counselors to write truthful letters to herself that she would never be able to transmit. She initially objected, but after a while she started writing. She had never cried before, yet the words came like tears. She wrote about how easy it was to lose yourself when others only loved your image and not your suffering, about the loneliness of celebrity, and about the emptiness that prosperity could not fill. Every letter turned into a painful yet therapeutic mirror. Angela's mind took longer to mend than her body. She had times when she wanted to give up and believed that everything would be resolved if she left rehab. But she knew deep down that if she went back, she would fall again. She learned to confront her feelings rather than avoiding them with the support of her therapists. She started keeping a morning journal in which she wrote about her hopes, anxieties, and guilt rather than her celebrity. She gradually began to find solace in the little things, like the sound of the rain hitting the roof, the morning light streaming in through the rehab window, and the infrequent times when her voice could chuckle again. She started to realize that acknowledging her past was more important to healing than forgetting it. She discovered that she could forgive herself for the decisions that had led her to this point. Recovery, according to her counselors, was about becoming someone new, someone who could live without having to flee, rather than reverting to her former self. Angela was deeply affected by that. She began going to classes, talking candidly about her experience and interacting with those who were more recently in recovery. Now, survival was more important than celebrity. There were still awful days when the judgment of the outside world reverberated in her head and the burden of humiliation felt insurmountable. She stayed, though, even on those days. "I am not my addiction," she told herself. Despite her errors, she was more than that. She was learning to live for herself, not for the cameras or approval, for the first time in years. The woman who had gone into rehab scared and broken started to get a little stronger as the weeks stretched into months. Her laughter came again, slower and quieter but genuine. Perhaps it was okay that the world might never see her the same way again. The approval of the world was no longer necessary for her. All she needed was peace, which she was gradually obtaining. The world outside felt strange to Angela when she eventually left the rehabilitation facility. Even though the air was cleaner, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the past, which was still hovering over her like a shadow. She had sat in silent contemplation for months, but the world's cacophony continued beyond those walls. The audience continued to mutter about the woman who had previously dominated their screens before her stunning fall. The cameras were still waiting, and the reporters were still looking for news. Although her release was quiet, rumors spread quickly. Social media hummed once more in a matter of hours. Her return was warmly received by several followers, who praised her bravery in confronting her inner demons. Others made fun of her, claiming that her failure was due to her conceit and bad decisions. Angela silently read a few of the remarks. She no longer reacted angrily to the hurtful statements. She had discovered in treatment that she had no control over how other people perceived her, only her own perception of herself. It was more difficult than she thought to get home. Her home, which had once been a flurry of activity and commotion, suddenly seemed empty. There were too many recollections of her saddest moments in the familiar places. For hours, she stood in the kitchen, gazing at the table where she had previously sobbed, the living room where she had turned away calls, and the mirror that had reflected an unfamiliar woman. Everything served as a reminder of both her losses and her victories. She had a peaceful first couple weeks back. She stayed away from social media, public gatherings, and interviews. She instead spent time reestablishing basic routines, such as getting up early, cooking for herself, going on walks, keeping a journal, and engaging in the little activities that helped her stay grounded. She began going to local support groups and talking candidly about her difficulties as a survivor rather than as a celebrity. She met people there who valued her honesty more than her notoriety. It was the first time in years that Angela felt judge-free and accepted. A few media sites eventually contacted her and gave her the opportunity to tell her side of the story, but she was cautious this time. She didn't want to make her recuperation a news story or exaggerate her suffering. She talked calmly and clearly about addiction, mental health, and the loneliness that comes with being famous when she eventually consented to one quiet interview. Her voice had become softer and more genuine, no longer loud or defiant. The world that had before made fun of her started to pay attention in a different way. Even so, she had a difficult time starting over. On other days, self-doubt attempted to drag her back into the shadows. The nighttime solitude was too heavy, and old temptations murmured in the back of her mind. But each time, she recalled the faces of the people she had met while in treatment, the tales that had kept her going when she felt like giving up. She clung to that. Angela started aiding others who were battling addiction as a volunteer at a nearby community center. No one applauded her, and it wasn't glamorous. However, every tale she heard and every individual she assisted gave her a sense of purpose that she had never experienced before. It served as a reminder to her that connection, empathy, and second chances were more important in life than fame or perfection. She gradually began to smile more. It was a gentle, sincere smile of gratitude, not the staged one required by cameras. Her family gradually returned to her life. Once tense conversations softened, with healing taking the place of blame. She learned to forgive herself, but she didn't expect everyone to forgive her. Angela came to the overwhelming realization that her past no longer defined her, even though she knew that people would always remember her faults. It wasn't the conclusion of her narrative, but it was a part of her. She had survived walking through fire. She was finally finding her inner Angela, not the one the world had created, and for the first time in a long time, she was starting to live again. It had become a calm year after Angela Deem left the rehabilitation facility. Calm, something new yet lovely, had taken the place of the pandemonium that had once characterized her life. She no longer woke up in a state of worry or fatigue. Rather, she sat on the same porch where she had previously experienced her breakdowns, prepared her coffee carefully, and woke up to the sound of birds outside her window. For Angela, the greatest luxury she had ever had was the simplicity of life. She stopped looking for attention. She was relieved that the cameras that had previously followed her around were no longer there. What she had now were genuine moments of calm that could never be reenacted on TV. She dedicated her days to serving others, telling her experience to inspire hope rather than elicit pity. She spoke to women who were still battling the same battle she had lost, visited recovery clinics, and reminded them that even the most severe scars may be indicators of survival. She still experienced flashes of rage, embarrassment, and sorrow from her past on some days. But Angela knew better than to flee from them. She accepted them quietly, telling herself that each setback had taught her something important. She had to rebuild her life with the truth after addiction had taken away a piece of it and peeled away everything false. Her once broken connection with her family had begun to mend. She communicated with her grandchildren more frequently, writing them heartfelt and honest letters and giving them small presents. Once turning away in fury, her daughters now extended a loving forgiveness. The woman who had been alone because of her suffering gradually started to find love again. Angela was sitting by the window one afternoon, writing in the same journal she had begun while in treatment. Its pages contained strength, forgiveness, and optimism in addition to suffering, rage, and sadness. She became aware of her progress as she went through her previous entries. She had changed as a person. She wasn't battling to establish her worth to the world. One honest day at a time, she was just learning to live. She penned her last entry with a little smile on her face. When I fell apart, I thought my tale was over. But perhaps the only way to start over was to break apart. I lost everything I considered important, but I also discovered who I was. And perhaps it is the true meaning of healing. Outside, the sky turned orange and gold as the sun sank below the horizon. Angela silently watched it, experiencing a calmness she had never experienced before. Only she, the evening air, and the sound of her own heartbeat were present. There were no cameras, lights, or people. She was aware that people would always remember her name for both positive and negative reasons. However, she was no longer in need of the world's acceptance. Self-acceptance was something she had strengthened. After living for attention, the woman now lived for a reason. The story of Angela Deem was no longer one of scandal or addiction. It dealt with survival, atonement, and the silent force of beginning anew. She was something much more genuine and human than the person the world had known in the past. Angela closed her journal as the last of the light turned to night and muttered to herself, not as a famous person or a headline, but as a survivor who had been reborn into her own truth.